Planning to do a tune-up on this thing, of course. No reason to do all this work and not make sure it's all running correctly. For me, a tune-up is changing all the fluids. Can't really do that right now since we're still missing a cover. Radiators are still off. I'd also take the carb out, clean and tune it if needed. We're replacing the carb outright, so we can't do that. What can you do, Jake? We can adjust the valves. And honestly, there's no better time than right now. We have so much access to the cylinder head right now, and as soon as we start putting stuff back on, we're just gonna make that more and more difficult. So if there's ever a time to do it, this is the time. And the XR, honestly, is a really easy bike to do the valves on. But what is a valve adjustment, Jake? Well, you see, the cam goes round and round and it opens and closes the valve. I'm sure you can find some great animations on this thing called YouTube about it. There's a clearance in there that you measure when the engine is cold, because metals expand, of course, and you got to make sure that that gap is correct. It's something you don't really see in automotive engines anymore because they're using like hydraulic lifters, and that's a whole thing. This really shouldn't take long at all, though. We'll get in there and get it done. All right, so don't be shy. Just dig right in, get you an 8mm, and pop these caps off. Gosh, these probably have never been off the bike. Make sure your gasket comes with you. On this bike, honestly, I bet these caps are interchangeable, but just keep them separated anyway so you know which one's which. Valve sits just right below here, and you can look down in there and see the spring and all that. And then on top here is your actual adjuster. But before we can adjust those, we have to get the engine in the right position. And normally you take a little plug out of the stator cover right here, and you put the engine at top dead center on the compression stroke. Of course, we don't even have a cover on this right now, so that's all right. I'll show you another way to find out. With the spark plug out, even this big 650 is really easy to turn over by hand. Here's the exhaust valves. They're going back up now, which means we're about to be on intake stroke. So we turn the motor over here, we can see the intake cams going down. Once we see these go back up, we know we're starting to come back up on compression stroke. So as we rotate the cylinder this way, we know the piston's going to keep coming up, and we want to find the point the piston stops and just starts to go back down. You can take something like a small plastic straw like this, something you know you're not going to damage by sticking down in there if you touch anything. We can stick it down in here until it's a good stroke on this one. We might have to start bringing it up a little bit. Should start to fill the top of the piston. There we go, now I'm filling it now. See? Oh, pushing it up. Still going up. And we're starting to pause and go back down. So right here, we're basically at top dead center. So for the sake of the internet and making this simple for you to understand, I'm gonna make a little chart here to show you exactly what I'm doing.
We've got front, back, left, right, and we're gonna draw 4 circles here. I'm gonna do this really like an elementary way. I'm going to do it just so you don't get confused. Then on these ones that say front, we're going to write EX, EX, and then we're going to write IN, IN.
So we're going to write all our measurements down on here as we measure here, and I'll show you how we measure all this in a second. And typically, as an engine wears out, the valves will be tight when you go to adjust them, when you go to check them. A lot of people always think they get loose from spinning around there, and I guess the metal's wearing down on each other, but what you more commonly see is they get tight because the valves slowly beat away at the valve seat itself. They just sort of wear out a little bit, and the valve will keep going up in the head a little more than it did before, until eventually you either have to do a valve job, or a lot of times it's too late and you end up having to get a whole new head. At this point, it's good to go ahead and choose whether you're going to be doing this in millimeters or inches. Once you pick one, just stick with that one. Don't try to convert back and forth. You know, most of these gauges do both. I hear a lot of people say, oh, always go with millimeters because they're more precise, and I understand people saying that, but I mean, these go down to 1/1000th of an inch, and that's what we're going to be measuring at. So just because I know these go in order in inches, where the millimeter ones jump a little bit when they go to that scale, there's just, you'd have to have this about 3 times as thick to go in 1/1000ths of a millimeters up. It's just overkill. So things here, that's my way of saying I'm doing inches. If I don't do that, I write little M's. So what we're trying to do here is measure the gap between the top of the valve and our little adjuster, and it's this small little gap right in here. Now, how you measure something this small? Well, you're gonna get in here with a ruler. No, you have to use feeler gauges. These are just thin little strips of metal. You can see there's measurements on here. In fact, this one is 0.004 inches, or 0.127 millimeters. Take this strip of metal, we actually try to stick it between the gap. What you're looking for is to get it in there without having to force it in there, and should be a light little bit of resistance. This is something that's going to be really hard to convey over video. When I was in motorcycle school, for instance, they made us do this over and over and over and constantly test it on us to make sure we had the right feel to understand what this is. So if you've never done this before, it'd be really good to get someone who's got a good feel for doing this. It's not too hard to learn, it's just you really need to practice it a few times. Also be careful, I should know better. These things are really sharp on the edges, and I actually sliced my finger on one a minute ago. We're gonna go around here, try to figure out what the gap is between all these, and we'll record it on our piece of paper. I'll start with this one right here, the 0.005. The gap is right here. 0.05 is not fitting on that one. Let's try this one while I've got it out. Seems to be too tight on those, so we'll go down so we can find one that fits. This one in particular right here looks really tight. It almost looks like it's touching. Jump down to 0.003. And you see how these things get real. They can tend to get beat up and bent. If they get too beat up, I'll just get a new one of these. They're fairly cheap. You can buy one of these at pretty much any auto store. Once this bike was warmed up, I bet it was really hard to restart it. The lower you go here, the thinner you go on these, the easier they are to bend. I mean, you can see this one's got little wrinkles on the sides. Still too tight. Still too tight for this one. Let's try this one here. I can get this one in there, but see how it's like really pinching? It's really hard for me to move it back and forth. Yeah, there it is. Just have to grab it up there. So this one, that feels about right for that one. I'm gonna jump down to the next one just to see what it is. We're getting pretty small though on here. These valves are definitely tight on the intake. 0.0015 inches. This, I hope, just drops in there. Okay, yeah, see this one is easily going in there. So we're gonna call this one actually the previous size we were on. I thought was it, but you know, that's why it's nice to kind of double check like that. The thinnest one I got. I know this is too tight anyway. I think this one's touching, honestly. I don't think it's gonna go in. I mean, I can kind of force it in there, but yeah, it's like creasing the metal getting it in there. So that's what I put when they're just too tight to even check. That's a shame. We'll have to check that down the road maybe after we get it running for a while. If I go to check it and it's tight again, we'll probably have to pull the cylinder head off and see what's going on in there. I'm gonna bet though, just in the state that this whole bike is in, that this has just been really neglected and hasn't been ever adjusted. It's something to pay attention to. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a huge concern, just something we gotta watch. Important to pay attention to these too as you're spinning them. This one actually has some kind of auto decomp that hits this one, and then this one has the manual adjuster for it right here. These are both things to help you start the motor. So you gotta make sure neither one of those is in a position on the motor, on the crankshaft where you're seeing them. You'll be able to tell, like this thing actually depresses just slightly. So you gotta make sure that they're not on. That one just went right in there. Let's go to 6. A little too easy that one goes in. 007. That might be right. I think they're gonna be 0.008. I'm gonna jump to 9 though, just to see if I can get the 9 in there. Feel pretty good with that 8 though. I can get the 9 in there, but that's kind of pushing it. Yeah, see that's like scraping as you pull it out. Both exhausts were 0.008, intakes were 0.002, and touching, too tight. I think you should always measure these two before you actually look at the measurement, like look it up and see what it is, because you know, it's really easy for you to go, well, I think it is this, and it's not, you know, like you play a little games with yourself. I actually have it pulled up here on the phone. Ideally, they would be a 0.006 clearance. Obviously, we're too tight. There's an allowance of 0.001. Anywhere from a 5, 6, or even a 7, it would all be in tolerance. But obviously, we're far off of these here. Oh, our lucky day. Look at this. 0.008. Would you look at that? The exhausts are absolutely both fine. They're dead where they need to be. And the intakes are both incredibly tight. Now, if you were doing shimmed valves, like what most bikes have, where you actually have to pull the cams out and shim them, pull the intake cam out, and then actually pull these little buckets off, and there's these little shims underneath them, and you'd have to measure those with a micrometer, do some math and see whether you need a bigger or smaller. In this case, we would need a smaller shim to make the clearances correct. But we don't have to do any of that because we've got the really cool, awesome adjuster thingies. What are they called? I keep forgetting. It's on the tip of my tongue. To adjust these guys, we need to loosen the nut up, adjust this screw until it's at the right spot. And we'll know that because we're actually going to get the 0.006. This was the ideal, perfect middle one. We're just going to have this out, and we're actually going to adjust it and try to get it perfect. We can loosen it up, and it moves really easy. So we want to get, not where we can't move it at all, but where it's got just that feel. And the thing is, when you go to tighten this nut, it often tends to turn this thing just a little too. What you may want to do, in this case I got it, that's maybe slightly too loose, so watch this. Come down here to tighten this. I try to keep it from turning. Nope, I got it. I think I got it a little too tight. Turn this back just a little bit more. Let's go for the 7 again. Nope, can't get the 7 in. Yeah, see right there. We can turn it to where. Nope, too tight. Before you ask me how tight do you make these, just tighten them up, you know, don't go crazy on them. I mean, if you did strip this out, it's not the end of the world, but you'd have to take this top part of the head off and disassemble it to replace some stuff in there. So try not to do that. So now we know they're both at 0.006. Yeah. No reason to make them any tighter than where you hold the wrench here and just give it a little, not perfect, but you know, keep, you know, like a Lego from falling in there. Pretty easy job, honestly, especially on a bike like this, especially when it's completely torn apart. But even not, you know, normally just popping the gas tank off, maybe at most loosening the radiators and moving them up a little bit. Don't cut your finger on the feeler gauges, they are incredibly sharp. And yeah, let's move on and do some real stuff now to this thing.